It is 3 p.m. in New York, 7 in London, and 4 on a Tuesday afternoon here in Seoul. I'm Conn-young. You're watching ARIRANG, Korea's only global network. We begin with this developing story. After nearly a decade of negotiations, Korea and Canada have finally reached an agreement on a bilateral free trade pact. Now, the deal was struck during summit talks between President Park Geun-hye and visiting Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper. For more details, let's go live on the line with our presidential office correspondent Choi You-sun. You-sun.
Hi, Conn-young. President Park Geun-hye and visiting Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper met for summit talks earlier today, which ended just over an hour ago, and the two leaders agreed to ink a bilateral free trade deal. The comprehensive trade pact, for which negotiations were suspended after Korea banned Canadian beef imports in 2008, goes beyond goods and services to include investments, finance, and intellectual property. Canada is Korea's 25th largest trading partner, with trade between Seoul and Ottawa totaling some $10 billion last year. And over the next 10 years, each side will lift tariffs on nearly 98% of goods. For Korean automakers, whose products make up 40% of the country's total shipments to Canada, the more than 6% tariff barrier will be removed in 24 months. Now, this means Korean companies like Hyundai and Kia, which currently take up 12% of the Canadian market, will be able to make further inroads to the North American country.
Now, You-sun, as is the case with Korea's free trade deals with many other countries, one of the major concerns here is how the pact will affect the farming sector.
Right, Conn-young. In a likely response to Korean farmers' concerns about the impact of the FTA, nearly 20% of agricultural produce, or more than 200 products, including rice, will be exempt from the pact. Tariffs on sensitive goods, such as beef and pork, will be partially lifted in 5 to 15 years. The Korean government plans to safeguard industries that may be hurt by the trade deal by drawing up measures to assist them. And with today's agreement, Korea is hoping for better access to a broader spectrum of energy sources, as Canada is a nation rich in natural resources such as oil and natural gas. And on the Canadian side, hopes are high that by signing its first trade deal with an Asian country, Canada is on a path to expanding its trade with the region. Canada is now Korea's 12th FTA partner, and after the deal is signed and gets parliamentary approval from both sides, it's expected to come into effect next year. Also worth mentioning is that President Park and Prime Minister Harper talked about Korea's recent interest in joining the larger 12-member Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Agreement. Canada is a TPP member, and the two leaders expressed the hope that Korea's TPP membership could create a synergy effect with the Korea-Canada FTA. Conn-young?
All right, ARIRANG News Presidential Office correspondent Choi You-sun on the Korea-Canada Free Trade Agreement struck only about an hour ago. Thanks, You-sun, for that. Now, moving on, the vice foreign ministers of Korea and Japan will meet for the talks in Seoul on Wednesday for the first time in 8 months. But with Korea continuing its demand that Tokyo must first apologize for its wartime crimes, no one is holding much hope of the two neighbors mending their frosty ties. Our Hwang Sung-hee has more.
Amid souring ties between South Korea and Japan, Japanese Vice Foreign Minister Akitaka Saiki will arrive in Seoul Wednesday for talks with his South Korean counterpart Cho Tae-yong. Seoul's foreign ministry says the two sides will exchange views on a range of issues with no fixed agenda, but the timing of the visit is notable. It comes just days after Korean Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se called on Japan at a UN session to take responsibility for its sexual enslavement of women in the early 20th century. Roughly 200,000 women, mostly Korean, were forced to serve the Japanese military during the Second World War, and many are still waiting for a heartfelt apology from Japan. The United States has been urging the two neighbors to put history behind them and to mend ties, concerned the intensifying friction will affect their trilateral alliance, which is key for countering North Korean threats and keeping an increasingly assertive China in check. Japanese broadcaster TBS reported Monday the U.S. government expressed strong concern about Tokyo's move to review a landmark statement that acknowledges its forced sexual enslavement of women. The Kono Statement, which was issued in 1993, was based on testimony from 16 Korean women. The Japanese government is now questioning the validity of the testimony. In April, U.S. President Barack Obama will try to resolve the diplomatic row when he visits Seoul and Tokyo for summit talks. Ahead of President Obama's trip, the three leaders will meet at the end of this month in The Hague for the Nuclear Security Summit. While some point to the possibility of a trilateral summit, the chances of the two neighbors shaking hands are slim. South Korean President Park Geun-hye has made it perfectly clear she will not sit down with a leader who fails to acknowledge his country's historic wrongdoing. 황성희, 아리랑 뉴스.
Now, North Korea has released the results of its first national election under its young leader Kim Jong-un 2 days after the vote. The North Central Election Committee said Tuesday all 687 candidates running for a spot in the Supreme People's Assembly won 100% of the vote. Now, we must note that there is only one state-sanctioned candidate for each constituency in these elections to ensure a foregone conclusion. Well, Kim Yongjoo, the aunt of the young leader, was retained as a party member despite the execution of her husband Chang Sung-taek last year, while officials who had connections to Chang failed to secure a spot. Kim Jong-un's younger sister Kim Yo-jung was also not included on the list. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's lavish spending accounted for nearly half of what the young leader spent on the country's ballistic missile program in 2012. Well, that is according to the UN Commission of Inquiry's report on North Korea, and this was quoted by the New York Times. It said Kim had spent roughly $645 million on luxury goods such as cosmetics, automobiles, and leather products. Now, in the same year, Pyongyang spent $1.3 billion on its ballistic missile program. The amount Kim spent on luxury goods is also about 4 times what the United Nations requested last year for that country's food and humanitarian aid.
When the latest news meets the latest business stories, we give you a bigger and better picture of the world. Business Today with Conn-young. Every weekday, only on ARIRANG.
At the Nationals.
Open an era of trust and peace on the Korean Peninsula. Speaking at the annual National Prayer Breakfast. The legitimacy of Korea's scandal-ridden spy agency is being called into question. Prosecutors raided the headquarters of the National Intelligence Service late Monday over suspicions that it fabricated evidence in an espionage case. Yoo Rian reports.
The case revolves around a former Seoul metropolitan government official, Yoo Woo-sung, who was accused of being a North Korean spy. Yoo was initially cleared, but the prosecution appealed the case, putting forth new documents as evidence he traveled to North Korea as late as 2006. Those documents were provided by the National Intelligence Service. The case began late last year when the prosecution found those documents it received were faked, raising suspicions the NIS had fabricated the documents to set the city government official up as a spy. Those suspicions gained traction after an NIS informant claimed he had forged the documents. The informant, identified as Kim, attempted suicide last week after leaving a note saying the NIS owed him money he was supposed to receive in return for forging documents. Prosecutors raided the NIS headquarters for over 7 hours on Monday to determine whether the spy agency had requested forged documents from Kim or whether it knew that the documents it received from Kim were faked. The intensive crackdown came only hours after President Park Geun-hye expressed strong regret over the scandal and called for a thorough investigation into the case.
이 일과 관련한 실체적 진실을 조속히 정확하게 밝혀서 더 이상 국민적 의혹이 없도록 해야 할 것입니다.
This is the second time the prosecution has raided the spy agency since President Park came into office. The first time was in April last year when the NIS was suspected of meddling in the 2012 presidential election to drum up support for Park. Yoo Rian, ARIRANG News.
Now, staying in this country, phase 2 of a massive medical strike has begun here in Korea after tens of thousands of doctors walked off the job on Monday. For the next week and a half or so, doctors taking part in the strike will cut their work hours and limit time spent with patients. Our Kwon-soa reports.
The medical strike has just begun. After Monday's walkout, the Korean Medical Association is progressing to the next round of its strike as planned. While those taking part in Monday's strike refused to provide any medical services, starting Tuesday through March 23rd, doctors will turn to a work-to-rule action. This means they won't work more than 40 hours a week, which is around 10 hours fewer than usual, and will treat patients for no longer than 15 minutes. A full 6-day strike is then planned to begin on March 24th, which could also include the closing of emergency rooms and intensive care centers. If residents and interns participate in the 2-week strike too, there are concerns this will affect the public, considering they work up to 100 hours a week. Although some patients were inconvenienced by Monday's walkout, it didn't create as much chaos as initially feared. The government has reiterated it will react strongly to illegal actions that put the health of the public at risk. The health ministry estimates around 29% of doctors at hospitals and local clinics took part in Monday's walkout, while the Medical Association puts the figure at 49%. As big as that discrepancy are the stark differences in opinion over the government's health reform plans, which prompted the KMA strike. KMA doctors are against government plans to introduce a telemedicine system that would allow for patients in remote areas to be diagnosed and treated via webcam, smartphone, or even email, saying this will impair the quality of medical services. The KMA is also up in arms over the government's move to run for-profit subsidiaries. Some doctors are worried the reforms could eventually lead to privatization of the medical sector. The Medical Association says it expects even more doctors to take part in the second round of strikes. Kwon-soa, ARIRANG News.
Well, the Pope is coming to town. Pope Francis will visit Korea in the summer, marking the first papal trip to the nation in 25 years. Officials say he will bring a special message of peace to the Korean peninsula. Kim Yongjoo has the details.
Pope Francis will pay a visit to Korea in the summer. The Vatican and the Catholic Bishops' Conference of Korea confirmed Pope Francis will arrive in Korea on August 14th and spend 5 days here on the invitation of both the Korean government and the Korean Catholic Church.
Pope Francis of the Catholic Church will visit Korea from August 14th to the 18th.
During his trip, Pope Francis will attend the 6th Asian Youth Day event, a festival of Asian Catholic followers from several nations in the central city of Daejeon, and also preside over a beatification ceremony of 124 Korean martyrs who were killed during the Joseon dynasty for their beliefs. The Pope will also pay a courtesy call to President Park Geun-hye. Cardinal Andrew Yum-Soo-jung, who heads the Seoul Diocese, said the papal visit would be a big pleasure and blessing for Korea. The presidential office of Cheongwadae also welcomed the visit, saying it could bring reconciliation and peace to the Korean peninsula.
We hope Pope Francis' trip will provide an opportunity to spread a message of love and peace, not only on the Korean peninsula, but across Northeast Asia.
Pope Francis will become the third pope to visit Korea, and the first since Pope John Paul II came in October 1989. Kim Min-ji, ARIRANG News.
Household loans fell for the first time in 11 months in January due to a drop in mortgage and credit loans. The Bank of Korea said Tuesday that the amount of outstanding household loans by local banks and non-bank institutions amounted to $643 billion in January, down nearly $2 billion from a month earlier. The central bank said this is the first time since February of last year that household lending had declined. Well, they attributed the fall to an end of tax benefits for home purchases that reduced the number of people with mortgage loans. It also said year-end bonuses may have helped curb demand for such loans. The Korean government is seeking to boost the nation's cloud computing industry with stronger support for small and medium-sized companies in the sector. The Science and Future Planning Ministry and the Public Administration Ministry will sign an MOU as early as late this month to develop a cloud computing platform based on open source software. Now, once the platform is complete, SMEs will be able to use it to develop additional software, which is expected to cut their infrastructure spending by nearly 75%. The government also plans to support collaborations among these companies to help develop new business models. Korea's cloud computing market is expected to expand fivefold by 2017 compared to last year to $2.3 billion. Now, reports are hinting Google will once again tap LG as the manufacturer of its upcoming Nexus smartwatch and next-generation Nexus 6 smartphones, which are slated for release later this year. Our Kim Ji-yeon reports.
Google has partnered up with LG for the production of a new smartwatch and other wearable devices. The U.S. tech giant is likely to release its flagship smartphone, the Nexus 6, this fall, and the device is reportedly based on LG's upcoming G3 smartphone. Google and LG had collaborated in 2012 on the Nexus 4, and it was an instant hit with Android fans. Google is also moving to expand the Android operating system on its smartphones to its wearable devices. Google Senior Vice President Sundar Pichai says in 2 weeks, the company will release the software programs for its wearable devices, including smartwatches and smart jackets, which are equipped with sensors. The upcoming Nexus smartwatch will be Google's entry into the rapidly expanding smartwatch market. It will join Samsung's Galaxy Gear and an anticipated iWatch from Apple. Samsung unveiled smartwatches with its independent operating system, the Tizen, last month.
The Gear 2 and the Gear Fit. We will release these incredible devices in nearly 150 countries.
The market for wearable devices is expected to expand to around $30 billion by the year 2018. Kim Ji-yeon, ARIRANG News.
Now, following a series of security breaches by financial institutions affecting tens of millions of people in Korea, the government has unveiled a set of measures designed to prevent leaks of personal information. Well, for a closer look at the latest announcement, we are joined live in the studio by Dr. Kim Yongjoo, the head of KLNP Consulting and our regular commentator on this program. Good afternoon to you, Dr. Kim.
Good afternoon.
So your view on the new measures announced yesterday?
Well, I suppose it's kind of like a structural approach and systematic approach, even though there are a lot of loopholes there. Just to cover overall the new announcement that was made yesterday, I think they're all of these details, and Korean media I don't think has done a good job in terms of like summarizing and presenting it to the general public about what these are all about. And my own view is there are three different levels. That is the scope of collection, first of all, when they put together and collect personal information, how it needs to be done. Scope of collection has been much more restricted. Second stage, the duration of record storage itself has been reduced, meaning that these financial companies are no longer allowed to keep these personal data for a long time. They will now face the limited time scope in which they can keep these records in their storage. And then lastly, the extent of use. These collected private information, areas they can be used, it has been much more reduced. So I think the scope of collection, duration of record storage, and extent of use itself, that's pretty much the systematic approach there. Okay, let's go over some of the details about what we are talking about here. Scope of collection, for instance. Now, these financial companies are only allowed to collect only a few items of your personal data, not like your marital status, the date of marriage, your relatives and family, things, your hobby and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
Those are no
your
longer
religion.
allowed. Right, exactly. Name, resident registration number, address, and the contact information, and a few other things, 5-6 different items. The scope has been limited big time. And also, used to be the way the Deputy Prime Minister Hyun Suk got into trouble was because he was saying, well, we had a choice, but we offered our private information, but that turned out to be was not the case. And now, systematically, it will be made that way, where they will give us choice. Before, we didn't have a choice. If we didn't agree onto this kind of agreement of providing all of this information, we could not take the next step in online registration, for instance, right? But now, overall, there will be a choice in terms of, to what extent additional information I want to provide to the service providers. If I disagree with them, they will still allow me to go ahead on this kind of online registration. So there will be other scopes of choices that have been made available for the customers.
Now, what about compensation for damages? I mean, critics seem quite unhappy with yesterday's announcement with regards to the compensation.
Right, that has been a very controversial area indeed, because there are banking businesses and financial institutions who have been arguing big time, oh, please do not come up with this kind of unreasonably extensive damage claims and compensation and penalty structures here, because that could actually undermine our business. So there have been much of pushing and pulling. And did you know actually this announcement of these measures actually had been delayed 3 times because of these financial industries lobbying and the pleading for leniency in terms of compensation and penalty. That's why critics have been saying, well, for instance, imposing 3% of penalty on the specifically data leak related business is too light. That's what critics are saying. 3%, what does that mean? Maybe 5 billion won fine that will be imposed upon these financial institutions that has a case of data leak. All those kind of things. Critics are saying that's too light. But that was the final result that government announced, I think, as a result of this negotiation with the financial sector.
Now, with regards to the use of resident registration numbers, now critics are saying the announced measures or actions do not go far enough.
They are saying that because they were expecting something other than the resident registration numbers. Looking for government to come up with a proposal to offer something else other than resident registration number here. And we Koreans do have a clear idea about how the use of resident registration number has been, has become prevalent. For instance, this morning, I was calling my cable IP TV service company, and on the phone they asked me to enter my resident registration number. The tragedy and irony of resident registration number here in Korea is it's used both as your identification as well as your password. You know what I'm saying? Right. I mean, isn't that the case when you identify your name, and then by the time when you offer your resident registration number, they make sure that you are the person that you're claiming to be.
Right. That's the way they identify you or make sure that you're you.
Exactly. But in ARIRANG TV, for instance, as a guest, you will easily be able to find my resident registration number.
Right.
So they're used both as identification as well as password. This is nonsense. Exactly. So in Korea, that needs to be changed, and Korean public has been asking for that kind of change, but for Korean government, within the limited time, they could not come up with an alternative for resident registration number at this time. So that's why critics are very unhappy about government not being able to offer the alternative. And they're saying it will take some time, but for now, yesterday's announcement didn't have that.
Well, the implementation of what was announced yesterday, that seems to be a critical issue as well.
Right.
That's not going to be easy.
Yeah, that's because of the National Assembly that's involved. National Assembly will have to change 2 laws, at least, about the data protection as well as the electronic financial services law. But there, the opinion is divided. On one hand, the opposition party has been asking, we should impose heavy penalties on financial institutions that violate this kind of due diligence and their responsibilities and so on. The government announcement yesterday was not going that direction. So there will be opposition in the way. And an additional factor is the thing that I already mentioned, the lobby from the financial industry. They will continue to argue to the National Assembly that excessive penalties and damages will actually hurt the growth and development of the financial institutions. So they'll continue to ask for leniency. And so just considering the fact that it took government 3 delays to come up with this announcement, now passing 2 laws revision at the National Assembly, it will be very tough. So we don't know when these will get to be implemented.
Right, this seems to be only the first step in a very long run of things.
Right.
All right, Dr. Kim Yongjoo, thank you so much for today. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
Thank you.
And on that note, we have to end this broadcast. Thank you for watching. I'll see you back here in less than 2 hours' time on Early Edition at 6.